So we don't die. We don't die. Our bodies do. Okay? We're eternal souls, and we're having nows as humans. We're having these lifetimes and these experiences. And there will come a point where we've done the exploration we came to do. That's kind of how I look at it. We're going to talk about that today. We're going to talk about exploring the understanding of ourselves and the world around us, why our everyday life experiences matter, why the relationships we end up having, the jobs we take, the families we choose, yes, I did say choose, why all these things factor in to that exploration process you're on, and why they matter, why you chose them, and how this all pans out in what we seem to want to call the end, but really is just the continuation.
This is a space of discovery. This is a space of remembrance. Join A.L. Garris and welcome to this space.
Death is not the end. Death of the human body is the space where we kind of just transition or leave and move into a new way of existence, a new space of existence. You could even call it a plane of existence, okay? We move into that space of ourselves, and you say, oh, what is this woman? How does she know this? What are her credentials? How can she tell us this? And how do we know that it's real? Well, first off, if you can kind of lean in and listen with your being, your heart, your inner knowing, your intuition, your gut, those are all mechanisms or tools that you have, that I have, that we all have, that when people say things or we read things or watch a video or listen to a podcast or whatever, we can gauge the truth level, we can gauge how we connect with that. And there's so many different beliefs, there's so many different understandings out there. And some of them, when we come in contact with them, when we hear them for the first time, when we see them for the first time, we process them from where we're at. Okay, so where our mindset is at the time, our belief structures are at the time. And so you could hear me right now, and you could register it, kind of feel it in your gut, kind of, use your inner knowing, your instincts, your intuition. And you could register this as okay, possible. I could agree with her, right? But I don't know that I'm 100% sold. I think there's additional possibilities. And then you might listen to this thing 6 months down the road, right? You revisit this particular connection, or a year later, and you might resonate even deeper with it, or you might have expanded those additional possibilities, right? All of that's good. All of that's fine. Why I say that at the very beginning here is because it's really important. It's one of the things my father taught me, and we're going to talk about him some more today as well. My father taught me to always listen to my own inner knowing, and to always kind of go to God or source, or, that deeper, bigger space of us that we just know that we know that we know is with us and as us, or something like that. It's always go to that space and always lean in and kind of listen for the guidance, listen for the confirmations, listen for that connection that is confirming whatever it is you're considering, right? Because we're going to get a lot of information from what we call the outside world. We're going to get a lot of information from family, friends, teachers, strangers, all of the ways in which information comes to us, right? But we're also going to have the opportunity to listen to our own inner knowing, and we're going to have the opportunity to get the signs and the confirmations from our spiritual connections, from universe, from God, from source, from all these beautiful higher dimensional reference points. We're also going to have their input as well. So why I say that is, as we talk about this topic about death and about being eternal and about what happens to people after they die, I'm going to tell you about some stories, some spaces of my own personal experience with loved ones in my life that have passed on, and my connection with them prior to their death, after their death, and just incredible, in my opinion, proof of we are more than one time through as this particular life, as this particular human. We are more. We are so much more. But listen to me with your heart. Listen with your intuition. Allow yourself to kind of tap into memories of spaces you've already been, because a lot of times you picked up information throughout your life in different ways that you've kind of stored or held on to. And then now at this space, you're going to hear, these different topics coming into play, and something in you is going to ping you or notify you of a connection. And you're going to go, oh my God, that's right. I saw that movie and I thought that, or my mom told me this when I was 7, or whatever it is. But you're going to have like a connection point. If you'll listen to your intuition, if you'll listen with your heart, if you'll allow that gut instinct to kick in, you've got a lot of guidance available to you inside your own being. Okay. But let's look at it. So like, death is not the end. This is a big one because it is the end in some ways. It's the end of the physical connection with either the loved one, the friend, the animal, our pets. So yeah, I'll acknowledge that. I'm in no way trying to make light of this at all, because it's an incredibly enormous space to navigate. I know. When I was 23 years old, my father died, and I think he was like 61 or something at the time. So I think that's young, right? I think I would have loved another 30, 40, 50 years with him, right? But for the majority of my childhood and young adulthood, I remember my dad struggling and fighting with different types of ailments and illnesses. Like, I think he had diabetes as a young person, and that takes a toll on the body. He also had like some issues with congestive heart failure, and had heart attacks when he was in his 40s. I've told the story before, but I remember being in the hospital with my family when he had severe heart attacks, and they didn't think he was going to live. And they kind of were like giving my mother like, the heads up, I guess, to somewhat try to prepare her and us. And I just remember being like, I don't know if I was like 7 or 8 or something, I don't know. But I remember watching that, and kind of I was scared. But at the same time, it felt surreal in a sense. Like I was trying to wrap my head around it as a kid of what was happening, because it was so fast, right? But then I remember the doctors coming back out hours later and being like, he's okay, he's going to make it. And we were like in shock a little bit, but they like documented it as well in the medical records there at the hospital, because the doctors said like his heart formed before their eyes. They opened him up to do open heart surgery, and then they were going to close him because they said there wasn't enough viable heart organ left because of the heart attacks. It had kind of just, this is not the right term, but it had kind of become mush, like it couldn't, be used. He would need a new heart. And so they were going to close him up. And then there were like 2 or 3 of them, the surgeons around him, plus the nurses and anesthesiologists and everything. And they were like in shock because they actually saw his heart organs start to form back into a viable organ. And they just watched it and witnessed it. And then they had to pull it together, and their mind and their emotions and all, they had to pull that together. The heart was pulling itself together, but they had to, just go and do what they were there to do, which was the open heart surgery, the bypasses, and they were able to do it. And he lived. So I always remembered that, because when I did lose him when he was 61, I felt the loss tremendously, but I was also very grateful that I didn't lose him when he was in his 40s. I was very grateful that I got that extra period of time with him, which also did include him walking me down the aisle when I got married, which was a really big thing as a young girl that I had always dreamt of. I always wanted that, you know? So when he did pass, there was this odd gratitude, if that makes sense, of what I did get, right? What I wasn't taken when I was 7, and what I was able then to experience from that till I was like 23. But that was a big loss, right? That was my dad. And I am one of 5 kids. So our family's a very interesting family. We're all from, the one unit, mom and dad, but one marriage, but they had us very spaced out. So the 2 first children were much older than the 2 last children. So when I was born, I had a sister who was 20, was already off on her own, and so that was an interesting dynamic. And I grew up with my mom, my dad, and then when I was like 4, we had my brother. So mainly my middle sister, I should say, she's still older than me, but she was the middle sister. She she's 7 years older than me. So still, there was a very big span of time where it was just my brother, myself, and my mom and dad. That's what I was getting at. And I think because of that, I even got closer to my dad in a sense. Parents always love their children equally as best they can, in good situation, right? In good family structure. But for whatever reason, I do think if there are less children to balance yourself between, the depths of those relationships, I think there's just an availability for them to expand even further because, it's just you, right? And so my dad and I were like best friends. And I did everything with him. Like, he was really into church and Bible studies and teaching and volunteering. And I would go with him. I would go with him to like everything, like church meetings, volunteer spaces. And I would help out the best way I could at my age level. And as I grew older and older, that kind of evolved and I became more and more active in all these spaces. And then I went to work for him at one point, and he was an incredible landscape architect who had been to Washington, D.C. several times at the invitation of the President of the United States, and he had received national awards for his work because he was so good at what he did, and he was such a creative man. And so I worked with him in his company, and I learned from him about life. I learned from him about business, and I learned from him about faith and love, and we were extremely close. So then I go to work one day, like I had many, many other days, and I show up, and they had an office in the home because they had multiple offices in different cities, and so in the one city, it was within their home. And that's where I was. So I went over there to go to work that day, and I showed up at the house office, and my mother met me at the door. And I could tell immediately, it's just like she didn't even have to open her mouth. It wasn't because she was crying or her face was red or any of that, because it wasn't. She pretty much looked normal, right? It was her energy. It was her presence. I remember she met me at the door, and she just looked at me, but her eyes were like conveying a massive loss. Like life was not what it was. Something happened. And I remember looking at her, and almost like my eyes maybe conveyed back, no. Like maybe that kind of don't say it, because if you don't say it, maybe it's not real, right? That's kind of how I felt, I guess. And then she looked at me and she said, I think she said, Daddy left us. Which I thought was a little bit interesting because he was the kind of man that you would never doubt those words and be like, oh, you're separating and he's moved on and he's going to go look for a different. Like when she said Daddy left us, I knew that meant he wasn't in the physical anymore. I knew that meant he wasn't here anymore, period. Like, Daddy left us. And it's just interesting to me because I've met a lot of people over the years. I've grown up a lot, and I have clients and students from all over the world that I work with for years now. And many of them have navigated these spaces themselves of a loss of a loved one, of death. And I hear those words in my head now, Daddy left us. And I realize what a gift it was to be in a family unit. And I say this with the most respect for all and love for everyone. But what a gift that my mother could say, Daddy left us, and I knew that meant he died. I knew there was nothing else that could mean. There was not a question in my head. There was not a, wait, what do you mean? Where did he go? I knew what that meant. And maybe that doesn't seem like a big deal to some people. They're like, oh, what's the big deal with that? But I don't know. I just think Daddy left us can mean a lot to different things to a lot of people. But I knew what it meant. And so that particular space was one of the largest spaces for me in this lifetime of navigating the loss of a loved one. It wasn't the only one I have had, but it was the biggest probably. I was just talking to a client the other day who recently their father passed away. And so I was sharing some of this with them because I felt it may be helpful, to be relative and people to understand they're not alone and somebody else gets it, right? That's always, that can bring some peace, right? But I shared this story with them, and I think it's a good way to convey the level of my connection with my father and the understanding of the loss of a loved one. So after my mom said, Daddy left us, and she just stepped out of the way, and I stepped inside the house, and it was just she and my father were in the house, so it was just her now, right? And so I walked into the home and walked across it was like you had to walk from one side to the other kind of to get to the living room area. And there in the living room, in his recliner, was my dad's body. And he had passed away in his sleep. He had gotten up out of bed in the middle of the night because he was having trouble with the congestion on his lungs. And he got into his recliner because he could sleep kind of elevated upright and it would be easier on him. And it was not new. That was common. So we kind of all knew why he was in the chair. And I walked over to him. And interestingly enough, he had an oxygen tank that he would use sometimes. And I mean, he was such a go-getter. So this is painting the picture of somebody who was sickly, but my father, you would never know he was sickly. He had the best spirit. He would always, if you say, hey, how you doing? He'd go, super, super. That was his comeback line. And then if you say, hey, how you doing? He'd say, if I'm as good as I feel, watch out. I mean, guy was so positive and so uplifting and encouraging. And you would never know he was on medications and he was suffering with these ailments, but that was just who he was. So interestingly enough, he's in his recliner and he's got his oxygen tank next to him. And, I think about that because I think it's like in the movies when somebody's having heart failure or something like that, they would give them oxygen or defibrillation or CPR, whatever is needed, right? And I think, wow, he even had the oxygen, right? But I believe he probably, I don't even think they did an autopsy because of just the medical history and everything. I'm pretty sure he probably had a massive heart attack or something like that, or just his heart stopped. Probably it just stopped because we all knew that in a sense he was on borrowed time. Every day was such a blessing because even though his heart rebuilt itself, when he was in his 40s, he still suffered with those heart-related ailments that were very hard on his heart. So I think that it just got too tired. And I think, it was just, this is all he had left, right? His body, his physical body. But I remember standing next to the chair, and he's in it, and he looks so peaceful. His eyes are closed. He just looks like he fell asleep, laid back in his chair, like reclining in his chair, feet up. And I remember putting my hand on his chest. He didn't have a shirt on. He was like in his pajama pants or something. But I remember putting my hand on his chest, and his skin didn't move. It was tight. And it felt different. And it was this instantaneous understanding, knowing inside me that was his shell. That was his shell. That was the vessel he had been in, his body, but he was not in there. I don't know if this conveys at the right level, but it was a very interesting moment. And then to be having it as the baby girl, the daughter, and your best friend, so it was big. It was really big. But I immediately went into this, what do I do next thought. What is the most beneficial thing I can do for my mom, for my dad, for our family? What do I do next? And I was 23. I worked for my dad, so I thought about his business. I thought about what do we need to do to take care of my mom and the business and keep things moving, which I think is probably a really natural response in many ways, because in some ways it also helps you keep moving. Does that make sense? It helps you keep, moving. So I started thinking about all those things, and it was a work day. So I knew we had crews of men that were waiting for us to tell them what to do, and jobs that were on, set up to be put in motion. And we had it was a big company. It had a lot of moving parts that needed to keep moving. And, I looked up, and it was just me and my dad in the living room, his body in the chair and me next to it. And I didn't see my mom. So I stood up and I walked through the living room, and then there was a kitchen, and then all the way through on the other side of the kitchen was the office, one of the offices where the desks were and stuff. And so I stood there, I don't know, 30 feet away from the office, across the kitchen, right? I'm all the way in the other room. But I'm looking through this part of the house. 30 feet ahead of me is my mom sitting at the desk inside the office. And she's just sitting there. And it was the most, I don't know, it was just a really interesting moment for me, because my whole life I had seen her as my mom. And I saw her as a caregiver, a provider, a protector, a nurturer, all the things moms represent, in the most, I guess, normal way, how we look at a mom, right? And as I looked at her across that house, she was kind of just sitting there in her own world in a sense, but she picked her hands up, and I saw her put her head into her hands, her face into her palms, And it was the first time in my whole life that when I looked at her, I saw a woman. I just saw this person, this human being whose life had just changed completely, and would most likely, in the most, in most ways, never be what it was. And I saw her dreams, I saw her goals, I saw her fears as a woman, not my mom. It was so interesting and big. And so I navigated that moment and allowed it, because I felt like it was very beneficial. It was very helpful for me to begin to understand myself more and my life more and the world around me more, including my mom and my dad, who I also in that moment had this deep knowing that even though that the shell was in the chair, the body was in the chair, my dad wasn't in the chair, but my dad was right there with me. I knew he was. With everything in me, I could feel him. It was a different feeling than when he was in his body, of course, because then I was gauging it with more of my physical senses. I could hug him, I could touch him, I could look at him, he could, he'd move and talk to me and whatever. But I could still feel him. I could still feel him. And so I was processing all of this. And one of the things that stood out to me the most that I did share with my client the other day was I left to go do the things you got to do. Like I had to go tell my brother because we didn't want to tell him over the phone. So we drove because he was about 2 hours away and we didn't want him to drive by himself after he found out. So we drove to him and I told my brother, and then we came back and we brought my brother. But when I got back, there was all these people at my mom's house. Of course, they were all there for the most beautiful reasons of support and love, And they were bringing food and they were bringing condolence and kindness and compassion and love. And I was very grateful for them to be there for my mom and my family, all of us. But something in me, it was so interesting. I knew my mom might invite some of them to stay the night because many of them didn't live where we lived and they were probably going to be there for hours and hours and hours that day and into the evening. And so I knew there was a chance they might stay the night. And here's what my brain did at 23 years old. All I could think was, if they spend the night, my mom will be kind and loving and she will make sure everybody has a pillow and everybody has a blanket and everybody has a place to sleep. And I didn't want to take a chance that anybody got my dad's pillow. Isn't that so funny and interesting? I didn't want anybody to sleep on his pillow. So I went in, and it's so funny because I say I snuck in because in a sense I did, but I didn't. Everybody was there. Everybody was in the house talking, eating, crying, whatever. And I kind of just made my way through the group without being noticed too much. So that's how I snuck in a sense, right? And I went in my mom's room and I got my dad's pillow. And I snuck it out of the house and I put it in my car and I took it home. I wasn't intending to keep it from my mom. I just didn't want to take the chance that somebody else would sleep on my dad's pillow. I don't know, somebody will understand this, I'm sure. And I slept on that pillow the first night. I slept on his pillow. And it was so good. If anybody loses somebody and they haven't done this or you come across this video or this podcast and you're hearing this now, this is a helpful tool or thing you can do. And you can get their shirt or their jacket or their blanket or their pillow or something that has their scent on it, because it was so comforting to me. Of course, I cried myself to sleep, but I laid my head on that pillow and I could smell his Brill cream, which was the stuff he put in his hair. I could smell his Old Spice, which was the cologne he wore. And I just, I guess in a sense, pretended like I was laying my head on his chest, like I was in his arms. And that was very comforting. It still hurt and it was a painful space, but there was always this sense, this knowing inside of me that I was mourning his physical loss, but he wasn't gone. And that's such an important message that I really hope we can let ourselves engage, right? Let ourselves start to carry this at a greater and greater level. Many of us already carry this understanding and this knowing. Some of us are just like coming in the door on it. But whether it's a family member, whether it's a friend, whether it's a pet, there's absolutely 100% understanding for the physical loss, right? But as much as we can, we have the opportunity to bring into the space, the experience, the fact, and I mean it, 100% fact, that soul is not dead. The body or the vessel is. They are with us. They are with us. They are with us. They are with us. I had an experience recently. I've had a lot of really cool experiences with this space, with losing loved ones, and the proof, 100% proof that we lose our physical connection with them. But that is the end of the understanding of the loss, okay? There is so much more that is still 100% available and even gained. We have the loss of the physical, but then we gain this inseparable connection. Because when they're in physical, you have to physically go to them to be near them. You have to physically get in their proximity to, see them, to talk to them, whatever. Well, you use a phone or whatever like that. That's also a physical connection in a sense, right? Because you're connecting with their physical being. But when they leave the physical, they are with you 100% of the time. You're never separated. Never. They're with you 100% of the time. And you can actually develop your intuition and your ability to communicate through dream space, through visions, through everyday experiences, signs and wonders. I mean, how many people heard about like finding a penny and it's a message of a loved one who wants you to know they're thinking of you and they're by you, or seeing a red cardinal and it's your loved one coming in to remind you they're right there. And there's story after story after story of children who are, 2 years old, 3 years old, and all of a sudden they're pointing at an empty space in the hallway saying, "Papa." Yeah. And then the mom says, "What do you mean, Papa? What do you mean?" And they keep saying, "Papa, Papa." And then they show a picture to the little kid of like the family, and it's got everybody in it. And the kid points just to the older man who's no longer in the physical, Papa, who died 10 years before the baby was born. The baby never met this man. And the baby points to the picture of the whole family, goes right to the Papa and says, "Papa." Papa points at the hall where there's nothing but thin air, because Papa's standing there. Papa's spirit is right there. Papa's soul is right there. And these little ones come in and they're not desensitized yet. They're not programmed with this new program yet. So they're able to see, they're able to pick up on. But here's the beauty of it. We can reprogram ourselves to see like we saw when we came in. We can reprogram and train ourselves to pick up on and connect with and communicate with our loved ones that are no longer in the physical. I do this all the time. And I'm starting now to realize the need to offer these teachings and this guidance to all of those who are ready, because I think so many of us are ready to step into this space of realizing how connected we all are. Okay? So recently I was laying in bed and I was getting ready to go to sleep, and I usually like to just kind of feel my gratitude for my day, for my life before I fall asleep. It's just something I like to do. So I just kind of think about all the things that make me happy, whether it's like, where I live or my kids, or something that happened during the day, an interaction I had, whatever. I just go for all different kinds of things that I'm grateful for. And every night I just like to kind of hold that space before I go to sleep and just say how grateful I am. So I was doing this the other night, and all of a sudden, I felt like the energy in the room changed a little bit, which is not anything out of the ordinary for me. If you follow my content, I also have another channel on YouTube. If you're picking this up on YouTube, there's another channel on YouTube called Garris. And that has a lot of different content over there of what a lot of people would call supernatural or paranormal, and I call it extraordinarily ordinary because it's my life, and it's been this way pretty much my whole life. So I pick up on energy and I register the space around me, and this particular night the energy in the room changed and it got faster. The energy flow was picking up very quickly in a good way, but it was definitely changing. And so like I kind of just listened, and with my heart and my being, my intuition, and I kind of register it, right? I kind of like read it and interpret it. That's just who I am. It's just what I do. But anybody can do this. You can train yourself to do this. I train people to do this. So I was interpreting the energy that was changing very quickly. And as I was interpreting it, I felt my dad. I felt my dad's energy. And so I said, like in a whisper, I said, "Daddy, is that you?" And this massive wave of joy, like so much beauty, just surged through my body. And my body actually jolted just a little bit because it was such a big wave of energy. Now that I think about it, I didn't get this at the moment, but now that I'm relaying this to you, I think he gave me a hug. That's pretty cool. I think he gave me a hug, and my body felt his energy. So my human vessel was like processing that shift of energy that was so quick, right? And it jolted a little bit. But all of a sudden I felt his presence, and we were having a conversation, and it was so real, like he was there right in front of me, right? He is, but I was registering it more. And so we were having this conversation, but it wasn't with my mouth like I'm talking to you right now. It was with my inner knowing. So I could hear him. Yeah. Some people would call it telepathy maybe, but it's even, I think, a different level than what we've completely characterized yet or been able to describe. But I could hear him and feel him talking to me, and he was giving me a bunch of information really quickly. And there was a lot of other beings or souls with him, and they were all very happy and very high vibrational space. And Jesus was there. Yeah, that was interesting. That came in. And that might not be a belief structure for everybody, but that's okay, because that's how the space beyond physical works, if you will, which we'll do a whole nother video on that or podcast on that. The space beyond the physical plane is an entirely different energetic space of existence. And in that space of existence, our belief structures create connection points that come forth as realities, even in that space beyond human form. That's the way the system works in human form as well. So we've talked about it before. There's a lot of other creators out there, content creators, who share this understanding that, the way you believe, your belief structures, your mindset, the way you live your life plays a role in the life you live, in what shows up in your life, and the things you focus on expand in your life, right? So this happens in all the spaces that we connect with, including the space that we might call the non-physical existence, the space in which our soul goes after it leaves the physical body. This belief structure you hold in this now plays a role in where that and how that experience looks to you, sounds to you, and feels to you. And my dad was very much interconnected with Jesus and the teachings of Jesus my whole life. So it would make sense that if he showed up in my physical world in a spiritual manner, it would make sense that he would be connected still with his belief structures that he held when he was in physical, even though he's no longer in physical and he's in spirit. You carry them with you in a sense. Does this, okay? So yeah, he was just bringing in all this information really quickly. He was telling me how excited he was about the work I was doing and about what I had done with my life and the books I'd written, and everything was so fast. He was just like, it was almost like, okay, I don't know if this will convey correctly, but it's a cool visual if you guys can pick up on it, okay? But it was like he was at some really cool event or party, like a concert vibe, just like everybody was there having the best time of their life, right? But he was surrounded by like all these other people, or like, but they were souls, okay? Like maybe my nephew was there and maybe his mom and dad were there, like my father's mom and dad. But it was just like this group of people that were around him, but it was like they were all talking and laughing with each other. And my dad was like opening some type of connection through the experiential planes of existence, right? He was opening some connection to like get to me, to talk to me, to convey to me, to touch me and tell me he loved me. And they were all still like totally in the zone of the spirit realm, right? And they're all like laughing and talking and having this best time. It's like, I'm talking like high fiving each other or something. It was so crazy, right? But my dad was like talking to me so fast because he wanted me to get the message and he knew he had the opportunity to do it. But it was almost like he also knew it wasn't something that was necessarily easy and would last for a long period of time. It was like he had to convey quickly. Does that make sense? And I'm thinking even now as I'm relaying this to you, that my state of gratitude, remember that's how it started. I was in bed preparing to go to sleep and I was saying all the things I was so grateful for, and I was feeling all the things I was grateful for. I was allowing that joy in my being. I think that helped him reach me. I think it's energy resonance. I believe that 100%. And I believe that as I went into that state of frequency or vibration by my choice of thought and feeling, and I was amplifying that, I was existing in a space of frequency or connection that was just close enough for him to pop through, okay? And be able to share with me his joy, his love, his happiness for the way my life was. And he was also like giving me some guidance because there were some things I was kind of thinking about that have to do with my outreach and my business and the things that I, am doing right now. And the timing was really beautiful. Like he found a way to continue to offer some guidance, just like he did when he was still here in the physical. So this is like, to me, one of my favorite topics, because I feel like so many people, and rightly so, carry a lot of fear about death or about losing their loved ones, losing their parents, losing whatever, right? And I feel like a lot of people don't understand what happens after somebody dies or they die, and they might fear their own death, and all those things make total sense and it's normal. But I do think that we're ready to understand ourselves better and to understand the concept of death better and the concept of the eternal soul better in a more expanded way that will help us all live with less fear and live in more peace with more balance. And that's my goal. That's why I do what I do, because everybody deserves to have that type of freedom in their lives and in their being, to where they live a life that has peace and balance available. And of course, navigating physical loss, the body, it has a lot of processes that it goes through, and it needs our nurture, it needs our care, it needs our compassion. We need our care, we need our compassion, we need our patience as we process that loss and as we navigate that loss, because life is different. But there's a lot available to us that can help us process when we open up to these spaces that are now available, that weren't available before, and we're taught, we learn how to interact, how to continue to connect with our loved ones. Even if it's in a different way, we're still connecting. We're still connecting. So there was like a lot more I was going to bring in here, but I think this went the way it needed to go, and we can just go down the other paths in upcoming spaces that we share together. But I would like to take you further into this because I think it's that important. So we'll do it on the next one. And until we do so, just remember how incredibly amazing you are and trust yourself more and more. Okay?